So, lastly, as well as Hanukkah coming up, we also have Christmas for much of the world. You have a talk that you give about the Jewish roots of Christianity and also about the roots of Christmas as a holiday. I wondered if you could just, in our last few minutes, just share with us a little bit of the insights that you give in that class.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a nutshell, um, the Jesus narrative exists in a historical vacuum. The only internal sources we have are the gospel narrative. So we take that at face value, but there's no way of really verifying that story, in terms of Jesus's life and what he did do or didn't do and what he said and didn't say. The gospel authors are not contemporaneous with Jesus himself, who is from approximately the year 1 to the year 32. The earliest gospel author is Mark, and he's about the year 60. He's after Jesus' death, and Matthew and Luke come after. That's a whole interesting discussion on the side. But we do know, even though the origins of Christianity really exist kind of in a vacuum in terms of that specific narrative, we do know, and this is not really debated even by Christian scholars, that Christianity emerges as one or more subsects of Judaism at that time, where there's much sectarianism in the Jewish world of the first century, the Common Era of Jews living under Roman occupation. And weakening of central authority leads to all kinds of groups like the Dead Sea sect and the Essenes and these different. We know about their writing survived. There's a tremendous amount of messianic expectation. It's always in Judaism. Messiah is an idea that we brought into the world. Christianity and later Islam will take that idea and change it and come up with their own concept. But it's based on this idea of a key personality who's a force of redemption to return humanity, put humanity in the right direction, and reconnect to God and elevate the world to the highest place it could possibly be. That's a fundamental Jewish concept, and we know this is alive and well in the land of Israel right around the time of the gospel narrative taking place. What we do know also happens is that in the successive centuries that come after, what we call Judeo-Christianity is initially just an offshoot of Judaism, like the Dead Sea sect, that followed a spiritual leader who they viewed as a messianic figure. When I say messianic figure, I mean not the notion of God having a relationship with a woman and a child being born and the woman remains a virgin. All those ideas would be completely, by the way, they're taken from the story of the founding of the city of Rome, by the rape of the Vestal Virgin Rhea Silvia by the god Mars. No disrespect to Christianity there, but is an exact parallel story that predates Christianity. But Messianism, a la the Jewish notion of a descendant of King David as a political and spiritual leader who will give the Jews not just independence, but elevate us to a level of role model for the world, and the world will unite around us and we'll be able to get back to that high spiritual level. So such groups exist, like the Dead Sea sect, followed a guy they called the Teacher of the Righteous, who they viewed as a messianic figure, and they ran off to the Dead Sea about over there where it's quiet and safe to escape what they thought was going to be the end of days, and they were going to, greet the final redemption and survive. So these sects are around at the time. When the Romans crushed the Great Revolt in the year 70, many of these sects are destroyed, but some of them obviously survive. And we know in the second, third centuries, whereas early Judeo-Christians are Jews who just followed a certain spiritual leader they viewed as a rabbi, more and more non-Jews will be joining those sects. By the way, to join those sects, you had to convert to Judaism. You had to keep the commandments. If you were a man, you had to be circumcised. You were just an Orthodox Jew who had a slightly divergent theology. Again, nothing to do with, Son of God and Trinity. None of that stuff is around at this time. But as we get to the late second, third centuries, especially, it'll basically separate completely out from Judaism, become a separate faith. And the great innovator of Christianity is Paul, who he claims he was a anti-Christian Jewish rabbi who then saw the light. Whether that's true or not, we can't verify. That's only his opinion. But his great innovation was replacing the commandments with belief in Jesus, replacing what we call deed, which is the mitzvot, the commandments, with creed, what you believe in. And that now opens up the faith to everyone. You don't have to keep any commandments anymore to convert. And Christianity will, after the Romans, off and on for several centuries, will try and wipe out Christianity, which they were very threatened by because it's a universal faith, unlike Judaism, which is a national faith. It threatened to undermine Roman state religion. If you can't beat them, join them. By the year 312, Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor who founded Constantinople, will stop persecuting Christians, and 12 years later will make it the official religion of the Roman Empire. So the short version is that Christianity theologically and in every way emerges out of Judaism, but basically separates out into a separate faith completely. As to the Christmas story, again, we don't have any tradition as to Jesus's birth date. The early church fathers, living literally centuries later, fix it at that time of year. In my opinion, it was more to depaganize the winter solstice, which was a time that had many major pagan Roman holidays like Saturnalia and the holiday worshiping Sol Invictus, the god of the sun, and making it now a monotheistic holiday at the time of year, replacing what was paganism with the new faith, which is now the official religion of the Roman Empire. But it definitely, there's no question, bottom line is that Judaism has two offshoot children, Christianity and Islam. Without Jews surviving, like the Hanukkah narrative, and being a unique culture that had so many positive aspects to it, there's no way that people don't imitate losers. Judaism offered any number of things which Roman historians talk about as being very popular amongst the pagan Roman world. A loving God as opposed to cynical polytheistic gods. Soul food. We had kosher. We had a day off. Shabbat. We had social welfare infrastructure. All of these things, and many Roman writers talk about how many, especially upper class Romans, were attracted to Judaism, become groupies of Jews. The reason why they didn't become Jewish was because Judaism is a really hard faith. There's too many restrictions. So Paul coming in and saying, okay, just dump all the halacha, the Jewish law, and just believe in Jesus, you get like Judaism light. And
So,
you get
what Paul innovated isn't necessarily what Jesus himself taught.
Right. Again, we don't know what Jesus really taught. I mean, we have the Sermon on the Mount, things that are recorded in, but those are not, someone's not standing with an MP3 recorder. We don't, like I said, not being disrespectful, we just exist literally in a historical vacuum. There's no contemporaneous historical accounts. I sat there and wrote down word for word. By the way, if you read what Jesus basically says, there's a certain amount of contradiction within the Christian Bible, but more or less he's restating basic principles of Judaism. Very much of what is said in the Christian Bible that is said in Jesus' name are just rabbinic statements about loving your neighbor and justice and kindness and taking care of the poor and things like that. These are concepts that Judaism brought to the world. So that's
right. And I'm cautious about asking this final question because I have to be somewhat politically correct. But what grade do you think Judaism would give Christianity throughout history up until now? Because on the one hand, the Jewish people have suffered a lot at the hands or in the name of Christianity. On the other hand, Maimonides talks about the idea that Christianity actually is used as a tool by God to spread many of the ideas that Judaism first articulated. So what grade do you think Judaism would give Christianity on a report card? And maybe it's worth dividing up into different times, because now the world today is very different to how it was centuries ago.
100%. First of all, it's interesting you say exactly that the Hanukkah stories about the Greeks thinking you Jews are too weird and too different and too wrong, and everyone else is a polytheist, why aren't you? Christianity is basically saying you're right. There's one God, there's one standard of morality, created the world, the history is a deterministic process, but we replaced you. So at least they kind of agree on the basics. They just think that that we got fired and they took over the job. But the question the nuance you said then is very true. Christianity at different periods of time. The medieval church suppressed the Bible precisely because not that anyone could read the Bible, was only in Latin. You read about people like Wycliffe and stuff like that in England, pre the Protestant Reformation. There were people put to death for translating the Bible into the vernacular and trying to spread it. The Roman Catholic Church of medieval Europe was an incredibly corrupt institution, and realized anyone reading the Bible and seeing how the church was behaving would see the disconnect was so great. But the reality is, to fast forward till today, the greatest friends that Israel has in the world today is the evangelical Christian community. And I have to set the record straight on this. It is not because they want the Jews to come back to the land of Israel so the Messiah will come and it will be Jesus, although some might believe that. And I say, by the way, if that's what they believe, fine. I'd rather have these people any day than the guys with the white hoods burning crosses and doing pogroms on my community. But what we do see with the evangelical community is these are not the first, but certainly the only modern and one of the few examples in history of people who truly take the Bible at its face value. And the number one reason they support Israel is because God says to Abraham, Avarcha mevarchechem palecha uru, I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. And I've heard recordings of them speaking to their congregations that they want to be on the side of the Jewish people because they want God to judge them. And they view themselves as being grafted onto the tree trunk that is Judaism. And they see the rebirth of Israel, the reunification of Jerusalem, the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And trust me, the average evangelical, albeit in translation, and albeit very literally, knows his Bible better than a huge chunk of the Jews in the world. They see this as fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And that's the book they take more seriously than any people on the planet Earth besides the Jewish people. And much more seriously than most Christians have throughout history. So they're on our side because they are Christians who are living as close to the text that they profess to believe in as any Christians in history. And by definition, they therefore should be the Christians who are not only generally very moral people, not corrupt and decadent like the medieval church, but also the people who support the Jewish people, feel the Jewish people are a blessing to the world, and are the huge supporters of Israel, and even willing to fight for Israel because they realize that's truth, and we're on God's, and they want to be on the same side as us because we're on God's side. And you said correctly.
Sorry, go on.
And Maimonides says it 100%. I always say I slightly tweak Maimonides' take. Maimonides says, "What's the purpose of Christianity and Islam?" And Maimonides was much more familiar with Islam because he grew up in the Islamic world. But he said before these faiths came along, it was just Jews. Hanukkah, we were the only people believing in one God, and the world's trying to kill us. It's polytheism's war against the only monotheistic faith. And Maimonides goes on to say, now the whole world, not the whole world, but billions of people today talk about a basic worldview that's Jewish, of one God, a deterministic view of history moving towards redemption, an absolute standard of morality. So it's a step forward. It's two steps forward. I say it's one step back. They're basically saying, you guys are right, but we replaced you. So the hatred of us is morphed into something a little different. But all in all, I'd say the big picture, holistically, it's definitely moving in the right direction. It's prepared the world to accept a worldview that would have been completely unacceptable at the time of the Hanukkah narrative.
And it's exactly as we discussed a few days ago when you very kindly took a call from me, where you were saying that the more Christians actually read the text of the Bible, what they would call the Hebrew Bible, the more philo-Semitic and in tune with Jewish values they tend to be. And the less so, the less they are.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. Rabbi Ken Spiro, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on JTV. It's always the greatest pleasure to hear from you, to learn from you. Your website is?
It's Ken Spiro, KenSpiro.com.
So KenSpiro.com. There's tons of content on there. Videos, in fact, we've collaborated on in the past with many others as well. Audio, linked to his fantastic books, which I highly encourage you to get. You can find them on Amazon, and also to contact him directly if you want to ask more questions or book him for some kind of speaking tour or tour guide around Israel, which I know he does. Rabbi Ken Spiro, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. All the best. Hanukkah Sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach.